everyone, I'm Vibha Chauhan and welcome to Chauhan Classes for Nuclear. So today I will explain class 9th Political Science chapter 5, and also this is the last chapter of this book. So today our chapter is Democratic Rights. Democratic rights. All so far in this book we have studied about elections, about the fair and free manner elections. We have discussed about the institutions, constitutions, and we have also seen the working of our institutions. But these are okay. These are okay for the citizens of India. These are good for the citizens of India, but not sufficient for the democracy. Here a third element is needed to be combined, and that is the rights of citizens. So in this chapter we are going to look at fundamental rights, our fundamental rights, and as all of you know that there must be some limitations on the government exercise. There must be some limitations on the exercise of power of our government, and those limitations are placed by our fundamental rights. So in this chapter we are going to look at our fundamental rights, and first we will see some examples of different countries about how the life is without rights, and after that we will discuss our fundamental rights, and after that we will discuss about the Commission for the Fundamental Rights. So all this we are going to discuss in this chapter, as all of you know that rights are very important for any person, for any citizen. So what are those rights? Why do we need them in a democracy, and our fundamental rights? These are all we are going to discuss in this chapter. So let's start with our first topic, that is life without rights. So life without rights. So just as I've said that, first we will looking at some examples about how the life is without rights. So as all of you know that from first chapter to chapter 4 of this book, we have studied about rights in somewhere. As for example, in first chapter we have seen that constitution is we have seen that democracy gives rights to the citizens. We have seen that this is a feature of our constitution, and in chapter 2 we have seen that every person must be given the right to vote. In chapter 2 we have seen that constitution is very important, and fundamental rights are the basic right of a citizen. And in chapter 3, in which we had studied about elections, and we had seen that every person has right to vote and right to be elected as a candidate, to stand as a candidate for elections. And in chapter 4 also we have seen about the rights. So in this chapter we are going to be discuss about fundamental rights, but first let us discuss how a life is without rights with 3 major examples, and those are, so first is going to be prison in Guantanamo Bay. So prison in Guantanamo Bay. Now what happened was that around 600 people of different countries were secretly picked up, were secretly arrested by the forces of US, by the forces of the United States, and were secretly arrested in the prison of Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, where there is a base of naval base. There is a naval base of the Navy forces of the US. So there around 600 people were arrested from different part of the countries, from different part of the world, different countries, and when they were arrested, they were guilty. They were said to be guilty of the attack on New York on 11th September of 2001. So they were said to be guilty. They were said to be have some election. They were said to be have some connections, relations with that attack. And when they were arrested, they were not even given the reason why they were being arrested, or even their government of those countries from where they were picked up. Those governments were not even informed or asked for permission. So US forces, the forces of US arrested many people and had not given any reason, a kind of solid reason, and had not given any information about their arrest, about their arrestment or detention. And after that they were arrested in the Guantanamo Bay of Cuba. Now that is under the forces of US, and that's why they had arrested those people. And those 600 men were just picked up by through the media. They did not even themselves know why they were being arrested. And you know what, that all the family members, they were also not allowed to engage any lawyer for them, to consult any lawyer for them. So those were against the rights of those citizens, and also they were placed in a very bad situation. They were lived up, they were arrested, they were living in a very worse conditions, you could say. And what happened, that all their family members, all the government officials, or even the representatives of UN, even the officials of UN means United Nations, where there are many countries, many nations, you could say. So those representatives, those family members and people from media even were not allowed to meet those prisoners. So you could say that those around 600 people were confined in just a place, and nobody was allowed to meet them. You could say that nobody, not even their family members, not even media, or not even UN representatives. So you could say that was against the right of citizens. They all had the right to live, right to their consult a lawyer, but they were not allowed to do so. And what happened, that many prisoners were demanding for their rights. They were saying that they had their own rights, and why those rights were not being followed on. And after that, many prisoners went on a hunger strike. Hunger strike, as all of you know what it is. So many prisoners went on a hunger strike, and after that, there is an organization for the fundamental rights, for the rights of the citizens, and that is Amnesty International. So this is a body for the fundamental rights of different countries. You know what, that this body works for the rights of citizens of different countries. So it said that Amnesty International intervened this matter and said that these were against the right of the citizens of different countries. It said that officials of Amnesty International said that even the rights of the prisoners of US were more than they were being treated on. So it was saying that even if we have arrested them on any suspicion, it was asking the US forces that even if we have arrested them on the basis of your suspicion, but they still have their rights, and that are also given by the US government. So why those were not being followed on? And after that, what happened was that UN supported inspection, UN supported requirements, you could say, that were placing the US foreigners, were requesting the US forces, US government to release those prisoners who were arrested, because even when they were found not to be guilty, they were still being detained. There was still being detention in the Guantanamo Bay. And after that, what happened, that US did not listen at all. It still had arrested those prisoners. So you could say that it had just secretly picked up the people from different countries, and after that, you could say that had arrested them, detained, and had a detention on them in Cuba, in Bay. And after that, nobody was allowed. So that was against the right of citizens, and that is our first example. Now our next example is citizens' rights in Saudi Arabia. So citizens' rights in Saudi Arabia. Now there might be a question in your mind that those citizens were not the citizens of US, of this United States, and that's why they were being discriminated. They were not given their rights. There were actions against their rights. But this second example is going to be an example where the citizens of their own country are still being discriminated. You could say that because US forces had discriminated them, had not given their rights, because they were the citizens of different country, so why care for them? But here in Saudi Arabia, what happens is that citizens of its own country are still being discriminated. And how? Let's discuss. So there are citizens' rights in Saudi Arabia. Well, you could say that in Saudi Arabia there is monarch system. There is hereditary king. Hereditary, as all of you know, that there is king at a present time, and after that his son will be king, and after that his son, and that will be continued. So that is hereditary system. People don't have to elect their own ruler. So people don't have right to elect their own ruler. There is a system of monarch in Saudi Arabia. Arabia. And after that, that king, that hereditary ruler, has to appoint all executive, legislature and judiciary. So just in the last chapter we have seen that judiciary that has to be independent for fairness in a country, but here all decisions are on the basis of that hereditary king. No legislative, executive and judiciary can go against that hereditary ruler, and those legislature, executive and even the judiciary members are appointed by the king of Saudi Arabia, by the hereditary king of Saudi Arabia. So that you could say that there is no democracy in Saudi Arabia. And after that, what there is that media can't post anything in oppose of the government, in oppose of that ruler. So media can't do anything to criticize that ruler, to criticize that hereditary king. So media has to show those things. If you could say that, for example, if there is a news channel, so it has to say good words for that hereditary ruler. It doesn't have to speak anything that hereditary ruler does not like. So that has to be followed in Saudi Arabia. And even more than that, there is a discrimination of religion as well. You could say that Saudi Arabia that has declared itself as an Islamic country. It has said that every citizen has to be Muslim, and non-Muslims are not allowed to practice their religion in public. They can practice their religion, but in private, not public. And all those Muslim religions, you could say that Muslim people are given some more rights, you could say, and non-Muslim are discriminated. And the worst thing in Saudi Arabia is a gender discrimination, the discrimination between men and women. It has declared that the testimony of a man is equal to 2 women. So you could say that whenever there is an official document, you could say that there one man is equal to 2 women. The rights of one man is equal to 2 women. So that is the testimony of one man is equal to 2 women. So that is of it. These are the rights of citizens of Saudi Arabia. Are these good rights? Do you think that are these good for the citizens? Is this good for the citizens? No, obviously not, because there is so much discrimination, and these are the exploitation of the rights of citizens. Now our next example is ethnic massacre in Kosovo. So ethnic massacre in Kosovo. So let us discuss a different example. As we have seen that while there was discrimination, while there was exploitation of rights in Saudi Arabia, just obvious because it is monarch, it is not democratic at all. You might have been thinking that if it were democratic, then there would not be any discrimination, then there would not be any action against the right of citizens. But it is possible too. Even a democratic leader can go against the rights of citizens, and that we will see in this last example that is given in your book, and that is of Kosovo. Well, Kosovo, that was earlier a province of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia has split into many countries, but earlier it was a very big nation, and in that nation, in that country, there was a province that is Kosovo, that is an independent country, you could say, at present time. So that Kosovo was a province of Yugoslavia, and you know what, that in Kosovo province there was a majority. Many people were ethnic Albanians. So there was a very big majority of ethnic Albanians in the Kosovo province of Yugoslavia. But in the whole country, the majority was of the Serbs. As all of you know that, just for example, let us take an example of India. In India, what happens is that if we see the region of Tamil Nadu, there will be more people speaking Tamil language. But in the whole country, there is a majority of Hindi speaking people. But in Tamil Nadu, if you go specifically in any state of that region, then the local study, you could say the local language of that state would be in majority. But in the whole, that is not. So the same happened in Kosovo. In Kosovo, the ethnic Albanians were in more number. But in the whole country, there were the majority of Serbs. And after that, what happened was that by a democratic election, a leader, you could say that a narrow-minded Serb nationalist leader whose name was Milosevic. So he was a narrow-minded, that his thoughts were not that broad, you could say, and he was a nationalist. He was a Serb nationalist, not an Albanian. And when he became the ruler by elections of Kosovo, now what he wanted, that he gave two options to the Albanians, whether to accept the dominance of Serbs or to leave that country. So that were their options. You could say that there was a great ethnic massacre of you could say that ethnic Albanians. So that ethnic, as all of you know, that a single particular community. So that was done there. And there is also a story given of a lady and her husband, that is given that lady and her husband were sitting in their house and were drinking tea, and suddenly many soldiers came up and there were many explosions, you could say explosions, and after that her husband was killed and her house was burned. So that was a story, and that is not a story of a particular house. There were many families that were ruined due to this massacre. So you could say that the rights of its own leader, the rights of its own citizens, and the ruler was also by democratic process was elected by the citizens of that country, but still were being exploited, and this matter was solved by the interpretation of UN, you could say that, by other countries when they saw that it was wrong, and after that it was intervened, and then you could say that Milosevic was killed. So you would say that happened in Kosovo, and there are many more examples. If you look at many countries, even if you look at China, well, China is not a democratic at all. It is a one-party community. It is a one-party rule country, and there are still discriminations in China as well about the rights of citizens. So that happens in many countries, you could say that, where the rights of citizens are exploited. And we will see the situation of India now. So first we have seen how a life is possible without rights. As you have seen that it is not good, it is not well for citizen, you could say. Now let us discuss our next topic, that is rights in a democracy. So rights in a democracy. Now, as you have seen these three examples of a life without rights, now you might have been thinking, if you were at their position, what would you want for the assurance? You might want assurance of dignity, of fairness, and you know what, that a right to equality among all the people in that country or in that province. You might want to ensure everything. You know what, that you might ensure some claims to those people. As for example, you might want that if anyone is arrested, then there must be some reasonable reasons, and even if they are arrested on the basis of some evidence or you know what, on the basis of any suspicion, then there must be some rights given to those prisoners, and you might want many more rights. And after that, you also want that those rights should not only be on the paper. You might want that those are you know, that applied on the ground reality, enacted on the ground reality. So those are the rights in a democracy. And now we will discuss about what are rights. So let us discuss what are rights. Our next subtopic, that is what are rights. So what are rights? As in the whole chapter we are going to look at rights. We are discussing about rights, and later on also we will discuss about rights. So first let us discuss the clearance of the rights. What are rights? Well, a simple and a very beautiful definition of rights is that rights are a claim of a person, and you know what, that those are the reasonable claim, not unreasonable. That means you cannot claim any right that you want to play a game and you have to break any other person's window. So that would be the violence of anyone else's rights. So you could say the definition of rights is that rights are a reasonable claim of a citizen, of a person, sanctioned by law and accepted, recognized by the society? Well, there are two terms that recognized by society and sanctioned by law. Well, first let us discuss what are rights by taking examples. Well, we see that we have to make claims, right? What are those? Those are the simple claim of a person, but those claims have to be reasonable, not unreasonable. That means you don't have to become a kind of terrorist. You can't have a right, you can't ask for a right, demand for a right that will break the violence, that will, you could say that would be against the rights of somebody else. You cannot go on the road and you go know what and play a very loud music at the night, at the midnight. So that would be against the violence, that would be against the rights of other citizens, other persons. So you could say that rights are the reasonable claims and recognized by the society. So if there is any right, if you have some right and are demanding a right from the government, but if they are not recognized by the society, so what are the use of those rights? As all of you know that every right to be enacted in the ground reality in the society has to be recognized by the society as well. As for example, over 2 centuries ago, over 200 ago, what happened was that whenever anybody asked for the rights of women, right to vote for women, right to education for women, it sounded very strange. People were mocking those people whoever said that. But now at present, that what seems strange, that rights that are not given in Saudi Arabia seems very strange to us. So that has happened in a long time. It has changed and has been recognized by the society. So you could say that every right has to be recognized by the society as well. Now here another term is sanctioned by the law. So you say that if there is a claim of a person and it is reasonable as well, it is recognized by the society as well. But if it is not sanctioned by the law, then it would be against the law. So it has to be sanctioned by the law as well. It must be written in some paper, you could say that in some law, as in constitution, as we have seen that rights of citizens in India are written in our constitution. So that has it has to be sanctioned by the law. It has to be sanctioned by the law and it has to be given rights. You know what, that it has to be given permission by the law, allowed by the law. So that is rights. That can be called a right. Rights are a claim of a person. Rights are a reasonable claim of a person recognized by the society and sanctioned by the law. So if you could say that, if you know what, that if there is a right but it is not written in our constitution, it is not given to us by the law. So what is the use of those laws? Those will be considered against the law, or you can even be punished by an offense of that law. So that's it. Those are the rights. Those are what are rights. Now let us discuss our next subtopic, that is, why do we need rights in a democracy? Why do we need rights in a democracy? Well, you know what, that we have discussed what are rights. We have discussed the definition of rights. But let us discuss why we need them in a democracy. Well, you might have been thinking that we have studied about rights, but what is the use in a democracy? Well, rights are very important. Do you know what, that against exploitation of a person, rights are very important. Rights are for the empowerment. It can even empower any particular community, any particular citizen, or any particular person in a country. It is for the individual rights. So rights are for many purposes in a democracy. Well, you could say that for the oppression of minority, you know what, that there is an oppression. You know what, that if there is a country, let us say for example in India, there is a majority and minority. So for the oppression of minority by the majority, in against it, their rights are given to the minorities as well. As all of you know that there must be some written rules, there must be some regulations, some rights given to those minorities so that they could not be dominated by the majority of that country. Let us say for example in India, in India, if there is a very big community, if there is a very big group, and if there is a very small group according to their population, so that would happen that it is possible that that majority would seek for domination, on those minorities to save, so for the saving those people for the oppression, from the dominance of that majority, rights are given to those minorities. And you know what, that India is a secular country, so those rights of religion to profess, propagate, to practice their religion are also given to every community, to every individual of country. So it happens that, you know what, in Saudi Arabia there was no freedom of religion. What happened was that non-Muslims were discriminated in the case of Muslim compared to the Muslims. They were more privileged. But in India, the rights are given to all religions equally. Every person has the right to practice their religion. So that happens. You could say that rights are very important for a democracy. Without rights, there would not be any kind of equality. There would be more and more exploitation of people, and we cannot ask for a democracy without rights, because rights are necessary, useful, important for a democracy. Now let us discuss about our fundamental rights. That is our next topic, rights in the Indian Constitution. So rights in the Indian Constitution, as well, we have seen about the rights, right to vote, right to stand as a candidate. So you could say that rights are very important for any country's citizens, and that is you could say that the most important thing in a democracy, as well as it sets some limits on the government. Well, some rights are given a special status, and those rights are called as fundamental rights. And now they are called as fundamental rights. Why it is so? Because those are some basic rights of the citizens to live with dignity, with their liberty, and those are fundamental to our life. Those are our fundamental rights. So you could say that since they are fundamental for our life in any field and are the most basic rights of the citizens, so that is why we call them as fundamental rights. And we are going to be discuss those fundamental rights. As we have seen about the preamble, we have discussed in the chapter of this book about our preamble, and we have seen that, you know what, that preamble describes everything that is in our constitution. It is beautifully written that every person must have justice, equality, fraternity, and liberty. So those are the sole purpose, those are the crux of our fundamental rights. So you could say that preamble describes in a very beautiful way about our constitution. And now we will discuss about our fundamental rights. In India, you could say that six major fundamental there are more major six fundamental rights to the citizens, and in each fundamental right there are some articles, there are some provisions of those fundamental rights, but are provisioned in the same manner. You could say that there are six major rights, fundamental rights, but even in those fundamental rights there are some rights. There are more and more comprehensive content about the rights of the citizens. So let us discuss about those six rights. So our first fundamental right is right to equality. So right to equality, that is our first fundamental rights, and it covers article. You know what, that in our constitution there are articles. So fundamental rights also cover some articles that have not been given in your book, but for some general knowledge you can have a look at them. So you could say that right to equality, that is our first fundamental rights, covers the article from article 14 to article 18, and the rights that is given under this fundamental rights are that right to equality. As from the name you could say that first article in it says that about equality before law and equal protection of laws. Well, equality before law and equal protection of laws, some different concept borrowed from different countries, and it says about the equal, that every person is equal before law. Every law has to be given, has to be enacted on every person equally. So you could say that those are that no person is above the law. Just because he is an important person, he or she is is an important person just because you could say that there must not be any kind of discrimination above the law. No person can be discriminated against law, you could say. So that is whether you are born in a upper caste, or whether you are rich, poor, high, low, a government official, or a simple farmer. You have to follow the procedures, our law, the procedures that are established by our law, and you are equal before law, and your laws will be protected equally as well. Your rights will be protected equally as well. So that is the concept, equality before law and equal protection of laws. And after that is that there must not be any kind of discrimination on certain grounds. So prohibition of discrimination on certain grounds. So it says that every person must have access to wells, bathing ghats, that's parks, that all those places that are for the public places, or are considered as for the use of general public, that are for the public use. So there every person must have access. So there cannot be, and no person can be discriminated only on the grounds of place. No person can be discriminated only on the grounds of sex, religion, place, caste, or place of birth. So that is that. Then only on the grounds. You cannot be discriminated only on the grounds of sex, race, religion, caste, and you know what, that these are only, not that there could be some discrimination against you on other grounds, because here written is that only the basis of race, religion, caste, or sex, you know what that. So that is it. And also it says about the equality in employment. So every person has a right to access to the public employment, and you know what, that no person can be discriminated only in the grounds of religion, caste, race, sex, or place of birth for the public employment. Every person can stand, every citizen of India can stand for any post for the public employment. But now you might have been thinking that there are reservations in public employment for the backward classes, as we had seen in the previous chapter about the reservation of SCBC, and you will know what, that there are many more reservations about the OBC and other backward classes, and the SC, STs. So are those not violation of right to equality? Well, they are not, because those backward classes, because the purpose of those reservations was not against the right to equality. As all of you know that in a race, what happens in a race, that there are rounds, there are rings in a race. But now every competitor who are going to run in that race, every runner are not placed in the same line. Well, because the innermost ring is the shortest length to run on, and the outermost ring is the farthest length to run on, and that's why the person in the innermost ring is placed behind of all those candidates, of all those runners, and the person who is in the outermost rows, who is standing in the outermost ring, has to stand a little bit far away, you could say that, a little bit forward to those all competitors, because he or she has to run the most length, the most farthest length. So that would be equality, and that happens, the same happens in our case of society. As all of you know that those backward classes, OBC, SCs, STs, were behind the mainstream society. They were a step behind, they were backward classes, and that's why they are called as backward classes. So you could say that to empower them, to make them equal to those all people who are in the mainstream society, those reservations are made. The purpose of those reservations was not against the right to equality, because equality just does not mean that every person will be given the same treatment. Equality here means that every person must be given same equal opportunity to achieve what they are capable of. So that is the purpose of our right to equality, and that's why reservations are made for those OBC, SC, STs, and other backward classes. So you know what, that here what is there in present time it may be possible that those reservations are becoming more and more beneficial for those backward classes, but the main purpose of those reservations was not against the right to equality, and that's why we cannot say that those are the violence of the right to equality, but because in Constitution itself it is written that those reservations are not against the violence, are not for the violence of the right to equality. So that right is also given in our right to equality. And after that there is abolition of a very worst practice in our society. That was the most of the worst, you could say that the worst practice that was under the tradition of India, and that was untouchability. You know what, that there was a very bad practice of untouchability that has been among the upper castes and the lower castes, and from a very long history it has been continued. So this right to equality also says about the abolition of untouchability. That means that practice of untouchability would not be continued, would be discontinued from now on, from then when the Constitution was provisioned, you could say, enacted. So after that you could say that there must not be any kind of untouchability, because it was the most cursed practice of Indian tradition. As all of you know that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who also had suffered from the practice of untouchability, you know what, that he had seen the sufferings of those Dalits about the untouchability, about the practice of untouchability, and that's why he had considered more and more about the abolition of untouchability. So that is also discontinued from then. And after that, you know what, untouchability does not just mean that you have done the practice that is not touching that person of lower caste, but also means that they would have access in all places, they would have access in the wealth, because under the practice of untouchability, those people from Dalits, you know that from SCs, STs are also not even allowed to touch the wealth, and even if they had touched that well, it would be cleaned off to purify it. So that was against their rights, and that's why they have to be treated equally, and there is an abolition of untouchability. And in this right to equality, there is abolition of titles as well. So no person is allowed to have such hierarchy, hereditary titles. So those 5 rights, you could say that those 5 articles in this right to equality, that says about equality among all people, no discrimination on certain grounds, not all grounds, because there may be some discrimination on the achievements, on the capability of that person. But there must not be any discrimination just because you are an important person. As for example, let us take an example. You know what, that in the about more than 5-6 years, many years ago, not just 5 or 6 years, many years ago, there was a Prime Minister of India. I would not rather say his name. You know what, that even many Prime Ministers of India have been accused, and they still had to go to the courts, and they still were being tried, but they were not found guilty. That was in another case. But you know what, that they still had to do work just as a normal citizen has to do for his accusement. So you could say that you can even accuse any Prime Minister, and he would still have to follow the same procedure for his accusement. You could say that for his accusation, and he still has to follow those procedures for his not to be found guilty. So that it is, we have the right to equality, so every person must be treated equally. It doesn't matter whether he is an official, Prime Minister, President, or even the President, you could say, the Governor, the Chief Justice, or a normal citizen, an ordinary citizen, a farmer, you could say, of our country. So that is the right to equality. That says about the equality among all the people. Now our next fundamental right is right to freedom. So right to freedom, that is our next fundamental rights, and it covers the articles from 14 to 18 in the right to equality. Now it covers 19, 20, 21 and 21A as well, and 22. So these are the rights that are covered by this right to freedom. Well, now right to freedom gives many rights that are related about the freedom. That is, every person has a right to freedom of his expression, liberty to express his views. So every person has been given some more rights about his freedom. freedom. As all of you know that in India, all citizens are given, according to this article, according to this right, fundamental right, that every person has a right to freedom. You know that right to freedom of expression, belief, view, faith and worship. Every person has a right to freedom, you know that, of personal liberty and right to freedom of his life. And in Article 21, it says about the right to life. Right to life, you know what, that in the right to life there are many more rights. Right to privacy, right to medical aid, right to decent environment, right to adequate food, right, everything, you know what, that. So those are rights that are given. You have the freedom of your own choice. As all of you know that the most important here is the freedom of expressions, views, beliefs, faith and worship. That is also given in our preamble. So every person here has the freedom of expression, and that is the most important thing. Well, how? Let us discuss. As all of you know that freedom of expression becomes a very big right to every citizen. Why it is so? Because in that mode you can communicate. To develop your personality, to develop your knowledge, you have to communicate with other people, and that can only be when you spread your views by the expression. So you could say that you can have any criticism, any peaceful criticism against the government as well. And this right gives many more rights, like freedom to reside in any part of the country, freedom to move on or to visit any part of the country, and freedom to, you know what, that there are many more. Freedom to have a peaceful without any arms and assembly as well. Freedom to have meetings, their political parties, freedom to form political parties, and many more rights that are given under this right to freedom. So you could say that in Saudi Arabia, no other person, you know what, that has the right to vote, the right to form their own political parties. And same happens in China. In China as well, there is no right for any person to form their own political parties. You could say that. And that is given in India. Indian citizens have the right to form their own political parties, to have meetings related to those political parties, and they can even criticize the government, but it should be peaceful. But they cannot urge any citizen, they cannot urge the people of India to have rebellion against the government. And that is the most important thing here, because you have been given freedom of press and expression, freedom of spreading your views, freedom to form your own political parties, freedom to have anything. But it does not mean that there would not be any kind of restrictions. There may be some reasonable restrictions. If you have your own freedom, it doesn't mean that you could have any public nuisance, public disorder. You should not be a kind of nuisance or public disorder. That means that if you have your own freedom, that doesn't mean that you will show that you will become a kind of nuisance for the whole society. Like for example, if you have your own freedom to do anything, that means you have your freedom to live, and even if you are, even if you are a prisoner, then you have your own freedom and personal liberty. As all of you know that what happens, that you cannot become a public nuisance or public disorder. And well, for example, if you have your own freedom to do anything in your right to life, you have the right to sleep, right to do everything. But what happens was that if you have many rights, many freedom, and you cannot use it against the society, like for example, as I just said in the introduction of this chapter, you cannot play a game just like that it would break anybody else's windows. You cannot play a kind of very loudest music at the midnight at 2 a.m. That would bother other people, that would bother other people of the society. So that would create a kind of public disorder, and you cannot have any kind of armed revolution. You cannot have any kind of rallies that are armed. So you can have rallies but not armed rallies, and that's it, because those are very important to maintain the society order, public order. You cannot go against the public order. As we have seen the example of Guantanamo Bay of US forces, where the prisoners were not given rights, and those rights of prisoners that are given in India are those that they must be informed why they are being arrested. That is also we had studied in the class 8. And if they have been arrested by or even have a detention, then that person, that accused, that arrested or detention person must be shown to the nearest magistrate in 24 hours. So it is the responsibility of that police officer and or any officer that has arrested that person, that accused person, to show him to the magistrate, to present him in front of the magistrate within 24 hours. Well, there could be some, that delay if there is a reasonable reason, but if there is not, then he must be shown in front of the magistrate within 24 hours. And many more rights are given to the prisoners, that, like, for example, he has the right to engage a lawyer or to consult a lawyer. So if we have arrested somebody, then he can have bail as well, to consult his lawyer, to talk with his lawyer. So that are rights to freedom. It does mean that you have your own liberty, your personal liberty, personal privacy. And in the recent case, many more rights were added, like right to LGBTQ, that was added in our right to life. So that was also, there were many, you could say, that circumstances, but it is, that it is now introduced in it. So that is right to freedom. Well, we will discuss more about in higher classes. We will discuss in brief about the articles, what are those articles in the higher classes. But now it is just we have to see some general topics under these freedom. So you could say that right to freedom is for the right to life, right to personal liberty, and all that of life freedom. What is freedom of expression, freedom of press, freedom to form political parties, freedom of rallies and the marchings, but in a peaceful manner, not to create a public disorder or a nuisance. And you even have a right to education in it. Right to education is also known that is a part of Article 21A. Is 21A, Article 21A in our Constitution. So right to education, every children around the age from the age of 6 to 14 years has a right to education, and he must be educated in that 8 years. So that we'll discuss more in higher classes, but now you have to know a little bit this. Now our next fundamental right is right against exploitation. So right against exploitation, that covers majorly two rights, two articles, you could say, that are Article 23 and Article 24. So those are the rights, right against exploitation. Well, it generally covers the part that there must not be any child labor or bonded labor or forced labor, that we call begar. So begar is a term for a bonded or forced labor. As all of you know that this right covers, this fundamental right cover what it is, that there must not be any kind of exploitation of any citizen of India. That means that there must not be any kind, most important here is that there must not be any kind of human trafficking among men, women, and children. Human trafficking, as all of you know, that the selling and buying of men, women and children for immoral purposes. So that must not be done. It says clearly, this right says clearly, fundamental right says clearly that there must not be any kind of exploitation in terms of human trafficking, and there must not be any kind of bonded or forced labor, that we generally call begar. So begar was a very cursed tradition of India. You know what, that there were bonded labors as well. People were bonded to serve those landlords because of their bond with their own ancestors. So that was a term of bonded labor, or there would not be any kind of forced labor as well. So that what is it refused the practice of begar, and the most important for the protection of children. You know what, that it also banned the child labor. That was very worse. Many little children around the age of 6 to 8 years were working in a very hazardous factories, in the mine, in coal mines, in matchboxes, that matchboxes factories, chemical factories. So they were working in those factories, those little children, and that's why it banned the child labor. And now it says that any children, our children below the age of 14 years cannot be hired in any hazardous factories. That covers the coal mines, you could say, or chemical factories, or the matchboxes factories, and all those kind of hazardous that are hazardous to health. You could say that those child labor are banned from now on. From this, you could say, and for this Child Protection Act was also enacted. But after 14 years there could be, because after 14 years it is said to have some more mature war, you could say. So that's it. And no child, that no child below the age of 14 years can be hired, can be employed in a hazardous factory, and that is right against exploitation. And there is what you know that even after this right was enacted, many acts were enacted for this. Still in India, many surveys says that there are many more children who instead of going to school are going to factories to work on to earn for their families, because you know what, that if they have become child labor, if they are in the child labor, then there will be a vicious circle of it. Just for example, there is a couple, and there is a family, and there is a child, and his parents are illiterate, so they would work as a labor, and after that child is also in the child labor and would become illiterate. Instead of going to school, he would have to work as a child labor so that he could earn for his parents, and after that when he grows up, he would still be illiterate, and you know what, that his child would also have to work as a child labor. So that would be a vicious cycle in which that family would be entrapped, you could say. So that is right against exploitation. That vicious cycle has to be broken down, and that is this fundamental right against the child labor, bonded labor, forced labor, against the human trafficking for immoral purposes. So that's it. Now our next fundamental right is right to freedom of religion. So right to freedom of religion, as all of you know that a little bit part of this right is also given, and the right to freedom, as every person, as every citizen in India, every person in India has a right to profess his religion, to practice any religion, and in a broader view it is given in this fundamental right to freedom of religion, and it covers also articles from 24, 25, 26, 27 and 28. So those are the articles under this fundamental right. So right to freedom of religion, what do you mean by that? This right to freedom of religion clearly says that every person in India has the right to profess, practice and propagate any religion. So that means you can have any profession, you can practice any religion. There is not any kind of limitations that you have to follow that particular religion, but it has some limitations as well. As you have the right to freedom of religion, it does not mean that you can practice any kind of rituals according to those our religion that are against the rights of any other citizen. As for example, there are many traditions in some of the religions in India. What happens that many people give sacrifices of animals or other human beings. So that must not be done. That would be against this fundamental right. That would be counted as a criminal offense. And there would not be any kind of forced conversion in your religion. You can have a conversion in any other religion with your own will, but you cannot be forced by any other person to be converted into that religion. That says this fundamental right, and this fundamental right also gives you a right that you can form any kind of community of your own religion or to manage your own religion by your own self. That is more given in the next fundamental right. But you know what, that this right gives clearly freedom of religion, that you can have practice, profess and propagation of your religion. Practice means that you can have any religion, you can follow any religion. Profess, that you can profess it in it. It is not that you cannot have it in public. You could say that you must have that it is not just you have to follow it in private. You can have a declaration, a clear declaration of your religion. And propagate is all of you know that you can even convert into any other religion, but not by forcing it. You cannot have a conversion of religion just by forcing it. So that must not be done, and there are limitations in it as well. As all of you know that we cannot give any kind of rights just because of it, because it would be against the rights of any other person's rights. So that is right to freedom of religion. Now our next fundamental right is cultural and educational rights. So cultural and educational rights. So that you could say that, as we had seen that the most important thing that the constitution makers had said that rights must be given, right? Some rights must be given to the minorities as well, and that is set in this fundamental right, cultural and educational rights. Well, now this fundamental rights give the rights to the minorities as well. First, it is that in the first article, and this says that every section of India has the right to protect their own culture. They must not be discriminated. No section of the society must not be discriminated just because of linguistic matters, just because of their culture, just because of their place. They must have access to all educational universities, and they must not be discriminated just because they have their own language, own culture, or they belong to a particular place. So that must not be done. So you could say that they have access to all educational. And second, it gives rights to minorities as well. Minorities have their own rights to form any associations or communities, or have their own educational institutions, and they have the right to manage those associations, communities, groups, or universities by their own selves. They must follow some procedures, some regulations, but they have the right to manage that institution by themselves. And if they are a community, you could say that if they have become a religious community, that means they have their own rules. You could say that they have their own right to manage themselves, to manage that community. And after that, there must be some rules in the educational. That is, as all of you know that India is a secular country, it respects all the religion, but there is no religion of the government. So that means in any public school there would not be any kind of promotion of any particular religion. As all of you know that in public schools what happens is that there would not be any kind of celebration for a particular religion festivals. That means occasions. That means no festivals, no occasions, no religion instructions would be given in any educational institutions. So that is it. We have to follow. We can have a respect for all religion, but that does not mean that we would promote any particular instruction, particular religion instruction in any educational. And even if there is any religion program, you could say in any school, public schools, then those students of that institutional, of that educational institution have their own right to follow that instruction, to attend that instruction or program or not. Or if they are children, if they are below the age of 18 or 14, then there must be consent of their guardian. So that's it. You could say that there is a public school, but there would not be any promotion of a religion, of a particular religion. And even if there is, then the students have their own right to follow, to attend that institution, or you could say program or not. So that is cultural and educational rights that give some specific rights to minorities of India, so that minorities would not be dominated by the majority of India. So those are the major 5 fundamental rights that are given. Now next and last fundamental right that we are going to talk about is, how can we secure these rights? How can we secure these rights? So we have discussed about the 5 fundamental rights, but what about the 6th fundamental right? Well, the 6th fundamental right is right to constitutional remedies. Right to constitutional remedies, that means that these 5 fundamental rights that we have discussed are the major fundamental rights. But what if the government itself violates these fundamental rights? That's why we have placed these fundamental rights even above the government, and that's why the 6th fundamental right, the right to constitutional remedies, says about that it is specifically given to the Supreme Court, you could say. It is said that if there is any kind of violation of your fundamental rights, then you can have proper directly, you could say that proper directly access to the Supreme Court. You can have and ask, you can ask for the enforcement of that fundamental right of yours in the Supreme Court directly. There is no allowed, that there is no need to go just to district court, then higher court, and then Supreme Court. That means you can have direct access to the Supreme Courts. And for the enforcement of those fundamental rights, Supreme Court can give some writs. Writs are, you could say that are specifically for the enforcement of the fundamental rights, and that are given to the Supreme Court under this fundamental right and high courts. So only to the Supreme Court and high court the power of writs are given. So there are some writs that are habeas corpus, mandamus, certiorari, prohibition, and quo warranto. So these are the writs that we will discuss in higher classes. So those are writs that can be issued by the Supreme Court or high court to enforce your fundamental rights. So right to constitutional remedies means that you can have a constitutional remedy just directly in the Supreme Court, the highest court in India, by the direct access if your fundamental right is violated. And you know what, the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said that this right to constitutional remedies is the heart and soul of our fundamental rights, because without this right there would not be there may not be any kind of enforcement of these fundamental rights. And that's why this fundamental right is the most needed fundamental right, you could say. Just as all of you know that, because all these fundamental rights have been made, but it is not that it is not obvious, it is not clear that they would be enacted on the ground reality, they would be accepted in the society, and for that there must be some strict procedures that must be followed, because fundamental rights are not just on the paper, are not just found for the paper, they must be enacted in the ground reality. And that's why this right to constitutional remedies has been made. And for enforcement of your fundamental rights, you can have an access to the Supreme Court. So these are the most major fundamental rights. As all of you know that there was one more right to property, that has been deleted from the list of the fundamental rights. And right to property that was deleted by the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1978. So that you don't have to remember, but for general use, you could say for general knowledge, you can have it. But in higher classes we will discuss more in broader perspective. Well, now our next and last topic of this chapter is expanding scope of rights. Expanding scope of rights. So as we have discussed about the 6 fundamental rights, we have seen right to constitutional remedies, we have seen right to equality, right to freedom of religion, right against exploitation. Now after studying this, you all might have been thinking that these are the only rights that we as citizens of India have, but this is not true. There are many more rights that are not fundamental rights but are the rights of the citizens. Those are called as the legal rights or the constitutional rights. So you could say that those are also the rights of citizens. And the scope, there is an expanding scope of rights. The scopes of rights is expanding as the time passes. As all of you know that if you see the situation of decade ago and now, so there are differences, there are changes in the rights of the citizens as well. Like there is a new introduction of a system that is PIL, public interest litigation, that is also another, you could say that, right to constitutional remedies. So PIL, as all of you know that if there is any offense, then it is not just of that particular person. You could say that if any other person is being exploited, that means that public interest, public order is being exploited, and that's why you can also file a petition for him in the court, in any court. So you could say that PIL is also one of the most important for any person, because you know that in the ground reality it might not be possible for every person to have access to the courts. As for example, if there is a labor group, you could say that if there is a family of laborers or workers and are very poor, but then you could say that they don't have that much access to the courts, they are not that much literate, so any other person who is privileged can have a, you could say that, petition filed for them in the court. So if he's a socialist, if he's a good person, then he can have a PIL, public interest litigation, in the court. So that is it. You could say that also comes under the right to constitutional remedies. So every person must have right to constitutional remedies. So now we have seen that the scope of the rights is expanding ever and ever as the time passes. As for example, there are many more rights, even though if we delete the fundamental rights, you could say, even though on the other side of the fundamental rights there are legal rights, constitutional rights. Like for example, as I've said, that right to property, that was earlier a fundamental right, but now it is just a constitutional right. So that is also right of citizen, but not a fundamental right. That it is not enforceable for the Supreme Court. For the enforcement, you have to follow the procedure, that is lower district court, and high court, and then Supreme Court. So you could say that there are more and more rights as the time passes. The scope is expanding. As for example, there are many more rights that are called as human rights that are contributed by the covenant. Covenant, as all of you know, that international treaties, as you could say that. So if there is any international treaty under the UN support in which India had taken participation, then India has to follow the rights that have been given under that treaty. So you could say that human rights have to be claimed, that are not claimed by the citizens of India, but under the international treaties those rights have to be followed as well. As you could say that covenant also contribute for the citizens in India. As for example, if we see that recently there was an addition of the right, that was right to LGBT. So you could say that LGBT, that was for that in India it was not being accepted, but now it is given some kind of introduction, you could say. So you could say that covenant also contribute for the rights in India, for the citizens' right in India, and also many more rights are expanding through this. Many more human rights are expanding through these international treaties. As for example, because those covenants, those international treaties have a pressure on the government of India. Claims form a kind of pressure on the government of India. Government is bound, you could say, because it has to be pressurized as well. There must be some pressure on the government as well. You could say that if there is a government in India, then there must be pressure on it as well, so that it would work for the citizens' well-being. Now we have seen the expanding scope of the rights of citizens of India. Well, there is a commission that we are going to talk about, that is NHRC, National Human Rights Commission. Well, this commission was formed in 1993, and its sole purpose was to see the rights of the citizens if they are being exploited. So you could say that NHRC, that is an independent body. Well, it is appointed by the President of India. All the retired judges or any eminent citizen or any official, you could say that has worked in that field, in the field of judiciary, would be appointed as a member of NHRC. But after that, it would become an independent body that works. It would seek matters from different parts of the country to be brought up into the media about the exploitation of the rights of the citizens. So you could say that its main sole purpose is to take up all the matters relating to the exploitation, violence of the fundamental rights or the rights of citizens to the media, to spread it among the people, for the awareness among them. And it has so much power, wide range of powers as well. It can summon, it can ask for witness, it can go to any prison for inspections, as well as all of you know that there are rights of prison as well. So it can go to prison as well for inspection. It can summon anybody, that can have an access to witness evidence. So that are rights that are given to NHRC, that is an independent body, but it cannot punish that is found guilty. It has to find the guilty person, but it has not right, it does not have any kind of right to punish that person who is guilty, because that is the work of the judiciary. If that work is done by NHRC, then what would be the use of judiciary? So that's why NHRC, that is a very powerful body, commission independent from all the government of India, and that also work for the justice in India. All the matters that are against the violence, that are for the violence of the rights of citizens, where the rights of the citizens are exploited, that matters are brought up by this commission that was formed in 1993 for this sole purpose. So we have discussed about the scope of the expanding rights and NHRC. As all of you know that if there is any kind of expansion of the scope of rights, it is because of the struggle of the people of that country, of that particular nation. As for example, we have seen the example of South Africa. In South Africa, it was because of the struggles of the people that it has become one of the most finest democracy in the world. You know what? That most extended versions of the rights are given in the South Africa. Like for example, right to privacy. Right to privacy, in what way it is given in South Africa, it is discussed. That means no communication can be tapped by any person, no phone of any citizen of that country would be tapped by any person, and any information would not be leaked of any person if it does not want. So that is right to privacy in South Africa. There is a right to food as well, right to educate food, and right to medical emergency medical kit as well. No person will be denied in South Africa for the medical aid, for the medical treatment. So there are many more rights that are given in the South Africa in the more extending versions. And in India, if you talk about, you know that many people urge for that there must be more and more rights in extended versions in India as well. So what do you think? Just think about your opinions as well. So this is all about the chapter we have discussed. We have discussed about the democratic rights, and in this chapter we have discussed that there are 6 fundamental rights and are very important for our life, for our survival, and that's why they are called fundamental rights. We have also discussed what our rights, why we need them in a democracy, and you know what, that as you will grow up you will see more and more changes in these rights. So just stay tuned. You could say that's in this chapter we have discussed about the rights, and we have a kind of perspective in our fundamental rights, and in higher classes you will read more and more about those fundamental rights, about those articles. So this is all about the chapter. I have discussed all topic and subtopic, and as we have discussed also, this is the last chapter of this book. So after that there won't be any chapters left, and we will continue. I will continue the geography of this class soon, or you could say that the geography of this class will be continued, will be started very soon. So this is the ending of this chapter and the last chapter of this book. I have discussed all topics and subtopics, and thank you very much.